Hey, everybody. Sorry to have joined a little bit after many of you have. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time today. I'll give it a couple of minutes just because, it's Zoom and it takes some time to get on. I'm sure folks are ending up other meetings. And then as soon as we get to like 10:03, something like that, I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, we've hit 10:03, so I'm going to get started. Hi, everybody. I'm Abe Solorio. I'm the Community Match Fund Program Manager for Sustainable CT. And we're here to talk about composting and all things sort of food waste diversion. We've got a pretty small group, it looks like. So I hope that today can be like, I want it to be as useful for you as possible. So completely conversational. If you have questions at any point, chime in. I mean, I hope for this to be basically just a discussion where we're bouncing ideas around. I do have a presentation, so I'm going to share my screen and I'll start running through that. Just a note, I'm on one screen today with no extras, so I won't be able to see the video while I'm sharing the screen and going through the presentation. So if you have a question or want me to clarify something, just go ahead and unmute and just pop in and voice it. Okay, can you guys all see the screen right now? Okay, do you also see my screen that shows like little thumbnail videos or just the PowerPoint?
I see thumbnails and your PowerPoint.
Okay, all right, let's go ahead and minimize that. There we go. All right, I can literally see nothing now. So, all right. As a quick overview, I know that many of you are familiar with the Community Match Fund, but for those who aren't, essentially this is a funding program through which we support wide-ranging sustainability projects that align with Sustainable CT's municipal certification program. We launched it in September of 2019, and since then, so in a little under 2 years, as you can see on the bottom there at those numbers, we've got just short of, and we're very fast approaching $2 million invested through the match fund. So it's about 1,100,000 from community investment, and then close to 900,000 matched by Sustainable CT. More than 7,000 individuals, local businesses, organizations, municipalities have donated to all of these projects, of which there are about 165 to 170. So I've got a couple of maps, I think a few slides later that go through some of that, but it's been really exciting, really broad investment. And I mean, really what this demonstrates is that in whole, this program it's run by community, by you guys, by the folks in your towns. To give a quick overview of the way the match works, I know we want to focus on composting and food waste today, but I think like the mechanics of the program are important to understand. So essentially what we offer through the match fund, it's a one-to-one matching grant. So we cover 50% of the costs for any project that falls within our max cap for granting. And then folks raise the other 50%. So in that sense, it's fairly like a traditional matching grant. We'll get into what makes it a bit different later on, which is the crowdfunding. But for the vast majority of projects, we grant up to $7,500 for any broad project that aligns with our work and meets the eligibility criteria, meaning that you could have a $15,000 project or anything less than that, and it would receive 50% from us, 50% to be raised elsewhere. So $10,000 project becomes $5,000 to raise, $5,000 matching grant from us. Larger projects are okay. It just moves us away from doing a one-to-one match to 75 cents on the dollar or something like that, right? So a $20,000 project would be raising $12,500, receiving a matching grant of $7,500 from us. The only exception to this is for renewables and energy efficiency projects. We can grant up to $15,000. So higher match cap because those projects are by and large, just by nature, more expensive. There's another slide about this later on, but I do want to, one of the really fun parts of this program is the speed with which it moves forward and also the accessibility. So there's no applications, there's no grant paperwork or anything like that. There aren't deadlines. So we do this on a rolling basis. Basically, anytime there's a project that someone's interested in, you reach out, and as long as we have money in the match pool, if it's eligible, we turn it right back around. So no standard, 6 months, apply at this time, then another 6 months later. There's no long review period. We turn these around right away, basically saying when there's interest, when there's excitement, and when a project is relevant, that's when we sort of, we try to open up the funding for it. And then on the back end, there's really minimal reporting requirements. So after you complete a project, you really just have to take a post fundraising and a post implementation survey, which each take a couple of minutes. So the whole nature of the program, the whole idea of it is to make it as accessible as possible for anyone who has a great idea, and to get all of the grant paperwork and the other things that might traditionally present a barrier to people to accessing funding or to doing the work, to get those out of the way. Now, when I talk about the match, we're not matching institutional money, municipal budget dollars, at least not entirely, or other major sources of funds. So in a lot of traditional matching grant programs, someone will say, you've got a $10,000 project. Okay, show us that you already have 5,000 elsewhere, and then we'll match that 5,000. For our program, folks come when they essentially don't have any money or don't have very much. So you don't come with that 50% already up front. Rather, we've partnered with a crowdfunding platform. In this case, it's Patronicity. In round 1 of the program, when we first launched, it was with a different partner. But so folks say, I need to raise $10,000 for this project. Sustainable CT commits up front, if it's eligible, to matching 5,000. And then the project leaders are connected to our crowdfunding partner, Patronicity, to raise the other 50% of their costs, in this case, $5,000, through a public-facing crowdfunding campaign. So essentially what folks do, you can see one of the images on the right-hand side of the screen here for the open air meeting space at Chester Elementary School. So we're asking people to reach out to their community, to local residents, to your friends, your family, your network, colleagues, whoever that might be, to have them invest in these projects and demonstrate their support for them. So essentially the 50% match from us is a match to community investment in projects. I would imagine most folks are familiar with GoFundMe, which is the more sort of ubiquitous fundraising program. This is fairly similar to that in that it's crowdfunding. It's many small individual community contributions that together make up a sizable chunk. We then match that. So everybody creates one of these public-facing crowdfunding campaigns. You blast out the work that you're doing to the community, you engage them in it, give them a chance to take ownership. And the way our program works is if community decides to fund the program, then that's the validation to us that we should as well. And so we match it. So in essence, our program is structured as a challenge grant. Community contributes half, we then contribute the other half. Crowdfunding is hard though. And so there are thresholds at which municipal dollars, institutional money, meaning grants, corporate sponsorships, other things like that, a certain amount of those can be passed through, leveraged against our match, and will be matched. It's just that you can't fund your entire project with grants or municipal budget dollars or something like that. There always has to be a significant portion that's crowdfunding. So this is what it looks like. And this is a very small project. You can see on the left, the Cheshire Conservation Connection. It was done by high school students in Cheshire. But so everybody creates one of these. You can see you've got a fundraising goal right here. There's this temperature bar like all crowdfunding platforms have to say how much you've raised so far, the current number of donors to the campaign. So this is all public, right? Somebody goes on the page, they see what you've raised, they see what your goal is, they see the number of donors. You have a deadline because it's crowdfunding. So you have to motivate people to donate. So it shows you the deadline. And then beneath that, there's text where basically you fill in, you tell the story and write the narrative of your project. On the right-hand side, you can see the donors tab. So this is publicly available as long as donors choose to be not to be anonymous. You can see what folks donate, who's donating, all of it intended basically to build community and to let people see like if their neighbor is donating, if someone else in town is contributing. So it's meant to sort of spur engagement and let people know, oh man, lots of people are contributing to this. I should too. And then as you can see here, again, on the left-hand side, there's lots of branding. So all of this says that it's supported by Sustainable CT. On the bottom right, it says it's eligible for a matching grant from us. So there's a lot of branding there too to let people know that this is a program that's part of another organization's work. This is just a quick overview. These are the maps that I referenced before. So there's about 170 projects right now. They're in, I think it's at this point, 67 cities and towns throughout the state. And then on the right-hand side, this is out of date, but it's a map by zip code just to show where donations are coming from. So really, I mean, projects are popping up all over the state and then donations come from everywhere. If I zoomed this out, you can see that there's also donations all over from the US. There are some internationally, but probably about 80% come from Connecticut. So it really is, it's local people who are funding these projects and investing in these initiatives in their communities. All right, onto the food waste. So there's, this is, I think we all know probably a huge issue in Connecticut right now. There's the new coalitions being formed to address it. The state's working on this. And so it's also a priority for us. We actually have funding in our program now that's dedicated specifically to food waste and reducing organic waste, as well as some focus on recycling and of non-mandated and things like that. But essentially what I wanted to run through today, what I think would be useful anyways, are some of the models that are already being implemented around the state that are pretty scalable, pretty replicable, and that are funded by us already. So these are things that we know are eligible, although it's not inclusive of everything we could do. The way that I've chunked it out and sort of how I look at the programs are 4 different types, and I'll show examples of each of these. But there's community composting, where folks are able to go, community comes into a site, they're able to drop off food waste there, and then there's composting done sort of at scale there. Another model is the food scraps hauling programs, which I think we're seeing a lot of those take off around the state. But basically, we're at a transfer station or some central town facility. There are bins set up, a contract is signed with a waste hauler, and then that hauler picks up food scraps that residents go and drop off and either takes them to an industrial composting facility, to quantum biopower for anaerobic digesting, or whatever the end facility might be. There's also at-home composting, so giving away either kits or educating residents on how to do that. And then food waste education ties into all of this, right? I mean, one thing is reducing waste, or one thing is managing the waste, the other is reducing waste or helping residents understand why composting, food scraps recycling, these types of things are important. So we'll look at a couple of the community composting examples to start. So in Stamford, this is actually a very new program. And again, each of these is funded through the Community Match Fund. So at the city's recycling center, they bought an in-vessel aerobic composting unit that can process up to 150 pounds a day. So the cost of these units varies. I mean, there's different vendors for them. But so this one, the way it works, this is a pretty exciting model, I think, because it lets folks do composting right there in their community, opposed to a food scraps hauling or a different program. So it means that you have the compost afterwards that you can actually use. But the way these work is essentially you can put in up to 150 pounds of food waste. It's then processed for 24 hours and is reduced in mass by about 90%, after which you take it out of the vessel, throw it in a static pile, and I think it's within 3 weeks you actually have usable compost. So it's a super quick program, and it just processes it very fast rather than some static forms where it might take a lot longer and maybe require more oversight or staff time. The difference is that it's expensive, right? So a unit costs about $24,000 for 150 pounds a day. With really robust participation from your community, you'd likely have to use a lot more than 150 pounds, which would be a good problem to have. But so this one, it can be expensive. There are various different options for this, though. You can buy the units outright. You can do multi-year leases to own. In either case, any structure for this, it's all eligible for funding through the match fund. A different model, and sort of the more traditional one, which is the image on the bottom right. In Greenwich, we helped fund a lot of the schools already had composting on site, but a few didn't. And so we helped fund the cost of simply building these wooden bay structures for composting. So this is the more traditional static pile composting. Cost was $3,200 to do this at 2 different schools, so pretty cheap. But this is another model that could be done at transfer stations, at schools, at different facilities. And again, inexpensive, doesn't require a lot of maintenance. Food scraps hauling is the model that I think we're seeing sort of like the most about right now. And so we've funded a couple of these programs and are excited to continue working with folks to help implement a lot more of these. They can be attractive in large part because it's not that much maintenance or startup that's required by the town or whatever the organization is that's starting it. It's a pretty simple process. I mean, essentially you get some bins at your transfer station, some signage, education, and outreach to residents, and then contract with a hauler to do weekly pickups, maybe bi-weekly during the summer, whatever the requirements from DEEP are. So in Greenwich, their program cost about $11,000. It was $6,000 for hauling fees, and then they had a lot more built into this: flyers, signups, educational resources, the bins, and things like that. So there's always sort of those the accessory costs, but the cost for hauling for them anyways was about $6,000 for a year's worth of fees. And that's where the match fund comes in. We can fund for any of these that a town wants to start on or to expand. We sort of view it as a pilot. And so the match fund can be the program that helps fund the year 1 startup of this, both the cost of hauling and the cost of the actual equipment. These are pretty good because they can receive a lot, right? There's no limitations, basically. You can have bones, dairy, fish, things like that. And again, not a ton of work, not a ton of maintenance. And then in New Canaan, there was another one. I mean, there are more of these. Other towns have these as well that they didn't fund with Sustainable CT. In New Canaan, their cost was about $7,500 for a year of hauling fees. Some of that, of course, depends on the number of bins you have, the amount of waste you expect. So None of these costs are indicative of what it might be in any municipality, any community, but they give an idea about this. It's not a terribly expensive program, and it's a good way to start something up and find out if this is something that residents are interested in. One really important note, I think, to add on this, and I won't speak specifically to the permits because I don't know that much about it, but DEEP has expanded and sort of eased their permitting to where now you can add satellite locations for these types of programs. Meaning, let's say that your transfer station is the main site where that's where most folks are going, but you want to add additional sites that are more accessible to the community. So maybe there are schools that would want to come on board, or a senior center, or community centers, different locations, wherever the municipal staff has sort of the capacity to oversee it and manage it. You can now apply to DEEP for a permit. It's really low amount of paperwork, and it's a very quick process for how quickly they review it and actually get back to you. So you can add on multiple sites throughout town to make this a more accessible program and really increase implementation and use by residents. So that's an exciting component. It increases your costs because you have additional sites, but it makes it so that you can bring this to now you have drop-off locations where folks are already going outside of the transfer station. Great way to sort of increase visibility with residents. Another model that we looked at, the Coalition for Sustainable Cheshire, they ran a program to give away home composting kits just to residents. So they raised money to buy the kits themselves and then to, I think, put on a bit of educational resources. The risk with this type of program, I mean, is one, as you can see, it's $6,000 for 90 home composting bins. So the bins are expensive. It can scale pretty quickly and become expensive. If you're going to do this for 20,000 residents, that's a lot of money. And on top of that, you don't know if folks are actually going to use it. So one of the things that they did that I think was really smart and really useful was to require anybody who signed up to receive one of the kits, they also had to sit through an educational training program on how to use it, why it's important, so that you knew that you were only getting folks who were really motivated and interested in participating and weren't just signing up for something that, sure, it sounds like a nice idea, but maybe they'd get it home and not use it, and now you have some plastic that's not being used. So they made sure that they were giving this out to people who were really going to use them. And then it was a mix. So some is going to residents, and then others were going to community partners. So gardens, food kitchens, faith-based organizations, anybody that has sort of like a significant amount of food waste produced where they could compost. So it was a bit of a hybrid program, one residential at home, and then two with different community groups. And then this is sort of the first part that I alluded to. This is the front end, I guess. In Westport, so Sustainable Westport is running a campaign. They have an existing transfer station program, and they just want to increase use. They want people to know more about composting, about food waste, sort of the crisis that's going on. And so they're running a campaign for a full cost of $15,000 that is essentially all its marketing, advertising, hosting events, creating promotional videos. So the whole goal of this program is just to educate residents about the issue, about how to participate in the existing program at the transfer station, and also to let folks know that if they want to, they can also sign up for, on their own for totally private curbside pickup programs, which is another model sort of to pursue for this. But all of it really is, it's just education. So I wanted to include this because the other three models that I've talked about are all implementation. It's actual composting programs, but a huge part of this is educating residents, letting them know that this is important, letting them know that the programs exist, and helping them sort of participate in this. So this is the front end or the accessory program that you could do once you have an existing food scraps, food waste program. I think I spoke about this a little bit already. I mean, essentially for this type of work, right, this type of project, I think the main takeaway is just to know that as long as it's public, it's eligible. More generally, I mean, I know many of you wear many hats. So our eligibility for all projects is determined basically on that the project is in a sustainable CT registered city or town, that it aligns either directly with an action and the sub action so that it meets the exact criteria, or more broadly, just that it meets the objective of one of those actions, which is sort of the more mission-based, why am I doing this action, right? As long as a project is public, is in a sustainable CT town, and meets the objective, the goal of an action, then it will also be eligible. The other thing to note on this, as you look to potentially take on one of these campaigns, so like I said before, it's all about crowdfunding, right? We want the community to voice their support for these projects, to get engaged, to take ownership of them, because not only does that mean funding for them, but it also means that then when you create this program, the crowdfunding doubles as it's the advertising. So you already have 100 or 50 or whatever that number is, folks who are really invested in this project. They're going to participate, they're going to share it with friends and family. So the crowdfunding is meant to be more than just money. It's also meant to be engagement. But whatever your goal is, so let's say that you have a $10,000 total cost project. That means 5,000 crowdfunding, 5,000 match from Sustainable CT. You take your crowdfunding goal, so your half of the project, and divide it by 100. And that determines the donor threshold that you have to meet. Again, it's sort of like the benchmark at which we're saying, okay, great, this demonstrates broad community support. So a $5,000 crowdfunding goal means that you need to hit at least 50 donors. And then the list below, this is sort of just a takeaway. I'll share the slides after this with everybody so that you have it. But it gives a broad overview of the other types of projects as well. Obviously highlighted in red are the food waste and composting projects, because that's the topic for today's conversation. I won't go over this again because we already did it, but I mean, this is the big incentive for the program, I think, outside of the match, is how accessible it is, how quickly it moves, how little work it is on the front end. So if folks are interested in composting, basically what we're saying is, come to us, let's get started on the fundraising and actually implementing the program. Let's not worry about the grant. And then to apply, it's totally informal. Shoot me an email, give me a call. The application is essentially that conversation that we'll have. So you call me up, you say, here's the project that we want to do. As long as it's clear that you have the capacity to implement it, that there's no need for permits or anything like that. As long as it meets the criteria, I mean, on that phone call, I could say, great, this is eligible. And then we start talking about getting set up with Patronicity and creating the crowdfunding page. So, I mean, this can go from talking about a project to campaign being live realistically in the same week if folks are ready and motivated to do it. And I think there we go. That's the end of the slideshow. So at this point, I just like to open it up for if you guys have questions about any of that, if you want to bounce ideas around for what could be eligible, if folks in towns that have programs and want to talk about it. I mean, at this point, it's open to anything that you guys want to know or talk about. And Laura, I see your question in the chat. So yeah, there's funding that's specifically reserved for these composting and food waste diversion programs. And we have various baskets at this point. There's some funding that's for energy efficiency and renewable energy. There's funding for composting, and then there's broad funding for the entire portfolio of sustainable CT actions for any project that someone wants to do that aligns with all of our work. Yeah, Felicia, go ahead, just unmute and chat.
Thanks. Well, as you know, we've been recipients of 2 crowdfunding projects so far. It was a pleasure to work with Sustainable CT. So for anybody that hasn't done it, it really is one of the easiest access to funding that and I'm a grant writer, that I've participated in ever. So I noticed that Tracy Wilson is on the call. She is the director of our transfer station, and we've been having conversations over the last, I'm going to say over a year, maybe almost 2 years. We brought in 2 local folks, one that is experienced in composting, the other who is experienced in waste management. I think we have some challenges with we're the smallest town in Connecticut. Technically the smallest, but we're really the smallest. And so Tracy could speak more to that. And her daughter is the one that we did the last matching grant with for the town pool. Her daughter is the rec director. So I'm really solid on the matching grant program. I'm wondering if there's any technical assistance, somebody that could work with Tracy and whoever else might be on this team to figure out if food scrap hauling is best for ours, or static composting, or like what can we be doing, and maybe also some support in any working through any DEEP process.
Well, so I don't know if I know Housatonic Resources Recovery Association. I think I'm getting that name wrong, but Jen Heaton-Jones from there. That's out in the western part of the state. I don't know that you guys fall into that region, but I'll take a look. I'll think more about that, unless you know already.
Yeah, maybe we can, I don't want to take up the time on this, but maybe we can speak off, have a separate meeting, Tracy, yourself and I, and try to figure out, she's the expert as far as the waste in our town. So, and, maybe together we can figure out a way that would work for our community to at least start doing something. But I do think that we are on a different grouping. We work through MIRA. So we're in a different group than Stanford and Greenwich are.
Okay.
And we might not have the same support system.
Yeah, and so I'd be happy to reach out to some of the towns that we work with who have implemented these programs too. I mean, I think oftentimes, like the nice part about this and the whole nature of our program outside of the match fund is to not have people doing things in silos and replicating what somebody else has already done from scratch. So I'd be happy to reach out to some of those folks too and set up, assuming they're willing, conversations to talk about what they did and how they did it. Not every town that's implemented this, right? I mean, Greenwich is big, 60,000 people, very different than a town with a couple thousand.
Right.
But we could reach out to some
4,000.
too. Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
right.
Thank
Different
you.
scale.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have a question that's actually a little bit in line with what you were saying about it does make sense to try and collaborate, especially with neighboring towns. So I work for the town of Bloomfield, and we're looking at doing a partnership with our farm, which is a farm in Bloomfield. But the first question is designing the right composting scenario there. So we've applied for a grant where we could possibly get some consultant to come and take a look at, see what would be the ideal setup there. But I think it'd be wise for us to look at this as a much longer term project and larger even. Like, what if we could partner with neighboring towns, say Simsbury and Avon and West Hartford, that are closer to our farm, where this could be like a small regional thing. Then if we're doing community match funds, how does that work? Like, could we be like a 2, 3, 4 town? And then with satellites as well. So sorry, I'm just piecing together all these different pieces I'm hearing here. So I think that's where, again, I'm back to like collaboration and pooling resources, and especially where many of us are volunteer or part-timers, and it's like how, yeah.
Yeah. So if your question is about money and like a varying match cap where there are multiple town projects, like if you're thinking that the scale would increase drastically if it's 4 towns, and so a $7,500 matching grant might not actually be that significant, then yes, I mean, we could, if it were a multi-town project, we could look at something about like increasing the matching cap to respect that it's actually 3 towns projects coming together. So that's one thing. You'd also be eligible for additional points because it would be a multi-town collaboration. So not that certification points is probably the main driver for this. I think the dollars from us are probably more important here and a bigger incentive. But yeah, where certification points matter as well, you would earn additional for that. But so anyways, yeah, if it's a multi-town project, I mean, one aspect about all of this is that it doesn't have to be housed out of the municipality, right? Like we can, so just personally, I've been working with a group in Willimantic to hopefully get started a program that works out of Click, a cooperative kitchen that's a nonprofit in town, because they also have a community garden and a space where they could host composting. So, I mean, one model is to do this at a transfer station or at municipal facilities, but I mean, our farm, I know, is the town farm, but any number of facilities, nonprofits or others, could also be the host for this. I mean, on our end, it doesn't have to be coming from the municipality. It often makes sense, I think, if it's going to be community scale, but it's not required. It just has to be, wherever the programs take place, they have to be accessible to the public is all.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think that'd be exciting to see a multi-town collaboration on this. The challenge is just where things get too far, right? If you're asking someone to drive 30 minutes to go drop off their food scraps, it becomes doubtful that they're going to do that. So that, I think, is really the big incentive for the transfer stations now, or the satellite locations, in that you can really now set up, a bin or a couple of bins in a number of different locations around town. Let's say you're doing a food scraps hauling program, or you could have different composting setups, in multiple locations around town where people can show up. But that, I think, is the sort of like the key way to drive one, visibility, which then drives participation in this. If they see this, they learn about it, they probably want to participate. And then if it's easily accessible for them, like that's the other barrier. I know that in Stamford right now, they have the recycling center where they have the in-vessel unit is, I think it's either in the north or the south part of town. And so other folks are saying, that are in the other side are saying, hey, this is pretty far. And so they're already talking about running a campaign to buy another one of these and to put one in another location that's more accessible for other residents. So I think that accessibility is often like the most important thing to think about. Yeah, Catherine.
Hi. Is there a way to get sort of an idea of what kind of community buy-in or participation there is? I mean, as I sort of struggle to think of having a compost drop-off at our recycling center, you know, when I start to think about numbers, it's hard to anticipate what the participation rate would be.
Yeah, so I think this can sometimes be at least it was to me, sort of a discouragingly low number. In Greenwich, I think it's 2 to 3% of households participate, which is actually like, so I heard that and I thought, oh, that's pretty low. If you do the math and do the numbers, it's actually a lot of people, and it's a lot of food waste that's being diverted every week. So it's by no means insignificant. And I think that's actually fairly robust participation for that type of program. So that's why I like, now that I know that DEEP has the satellite locations, that's why I talk about that, just because the transfer station is often out of the way. It's not a place that people are going to often, or that lots of people are going to regularly. So I think that there's, you know, if the schools participate, people are already going to the schools, right? Their kids are going there, they're picking their kids up, they're dropping them off. So that's a spot that it's highly visible, it's super accessible. How much work is it to ask someone when you go to school to pick your kid up, also like drop your food scraps off here, and other locations like that. So I think that there's a good way to increase participation and to make it pretty broad, but it's all about, you know, putting these in places that people are actually going.
Okay. And then, so what are, you mentioned libraries, that was one I hadn't thought of. I made a note of that. I mean, I think Middletown has it near Town Hall. They have a drop off. Are there other suggestions of, you know, just sort of as I think about satellite?
Yeah, so I think Middletown is actually the first town that applied for the satellite location. So this is new that DEEP did this. It's like, it's pretty recent.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I would think libraries, if there's community centers, if there's, I don't know, community gardens are a bit harder because it's harder to figure out like how you might manage it there and actually, you know, oversee it and ensure that it's safe, but I think you could. The DEEP requirement, I think, is just that there be some capacity for management, and that over the summer that it be picked up, I think probably like twice a week, because of potentials for odor and rodent control and stuff like that. But it could also be a combination with like nonprofit partners. So if there's YMCAs or Boys and Girls Clubs or other organizations like that, as long as they, you know, are able to get the permit for this and have this in their, I don't know, their scope of work, whatever that might be, then I think those are the ones to shoot for.
What are the barriers when people say they don't want it there? You know, smell, flies. I mean, and is there, do you have sort of talking points?
No, so because the thing is, I don't actually think those are an issue, right? I mean, these are enclosed bins. There's not a lot of odor. There's the rodent control is pretty easy to manage. I mean, one thing, so I've talked with some of the haulers about this before. You know, one thing that they suggest in some cases is to have you put like a lock on the bins. You can have you don't have to do this, right? But if it's at a facility that's not going to be overseen 24/7 or at the time of drop off, right? If it's something that residents could sort of just show up on their time and do, you put a lock on it. You put like a sticker that has the code to the lock right there. So, you know, anybody who's coming, they can open it. It's not to like make it inaccessible, but you don't want to have, sure, an animal that could get into it anytime and knock it over and spill it out. Or I don't know, let's say that there's kids are going to be kids and maybe they'd mess around, or even just like someone who's walking by and sees a bin and wants to throw trash or recyclables away. You want to have some ability to manage it. So in that case, I think it's really, you put the lock on it and then, but you have the code right there so people can get into it. And anyone who's coming there for food scraps is going to be motivated enough to put in the code and open it. Someone who's coming to throw away their trash walking on the street will probably look somewhere else.
Okay, thanks. That's great.
So yeah, I think the bigger thing is getting over the perception of these being smelly and having rodents come everywhere and that type of stuff. Like as far as I know, it hasn't actually been an issue for anyone. It's just a perceived issue that can sometimes be hard to overcome.
Okay, that's good to know. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Abe, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, David.
Hi, how are you? I also have Lindsay Rivers with me. She's
Hey,
going to
Lindsay.
add something, but I know somebody asked about to gauge what kind of people would be willing to do this. If I could plug another Sustainable Connecticut, CT, I'm sorry, option for folks is we brought in Alistair from the Yukon. He's a Yukon master composter, and we did both home composting seminars and dedicated worm composting seminar, and the turnout was huge. So we weren't sure either, but with what we had for a turnout, I think that could help you gauge what kind of interest there is in your town. So that's a way, but I'm going to kick it over to Lindsay.
We also got in contact with, I think it's Blue Earth, about doing the curbside collection. And they needed 50 people to do a pilot program. And we just went out and did like questionnaires on our social media, through our website contacts, all of our contact lists. And we got over 200 people that want to participate in it. I mean, we have over 60,000 people in Bristol, so 200 is nothing. But I think once you start doing it, other people will latch onto it. So we just went right out to the public and started asking. If you have a farmer's market, you can ask that way. All it is a question. Would you be interested? Yes or no? You know, that's it.
Lindsay, David, thank you guys for pointing this out. I had forgotten to sort of mention the curbside model as well. So I have a question for you guys about that. Do you know what have you guys gotten to this point to actually figuring out like an estimated cost for doing a 50-person curbside pickup pilot?
So a 50-person once, you could do twice a month or once a month. And I want to say it was like $12 per pickup. It
Okay.
wasn't that expensive. I'm actually doing I'm going to be doing a pilot program in the fall with one of our elementary schools. It's really hard to do anything in this town. I try to, if a principal is like willing to do it, I'll get her to do it, and then other people will latch on. It's all about getting your foot, even if it's tiny, and then other people will be like, oh, I want to do that. Just like our outdoor classroom, the gardens, all of that. No one wanted to do that stuff until we did it for the first time. And then everybody wanted it after that.
Yeah, your outdoor classrooms have also spread to Hartford.
Good, yes, I heard about that. And the person that designed our outdoor classroom is the same person that designed the one in Hartford.
Yeah.
He's related to her, so it worked out.
Yeah, that's great. So I'll just add on too about the curbside model. That's another one that's eligible on our end. If you wanted to pilot a curbside pickup, so where residents, let's say that it was a neighborhood, or sure that it's just that it's a free sign up and it's the first 50 or the first 100 residents who sign up, something like that. And then you wanted to run a curbside pickup program at their houses with a hauler, Blue Earth, Curbside Action, whoever it is, that's eligible. I often just don't talk about that one because for a municipality to take that on, it's expensive, right? So 50 people, $12 per month, $600 in a year, $7,000. Now scale that to 50,000 people. Of course, there's scale to this all, and the price will change, and you'd hope that residents will sign up for it and pay it for themselves. But that is a model. We're interested in seeing what happens, sort of what utilization is like with curbside models. So if that's something that you want to try, what I'm trying to talk about is like the hybrid curbside, where maybe there's 10 community locations throughout town with drop-offs rather than curbside, just because it's cheaper, it's more manageable to raise the money, and it's more at scale with our program. But that's awesome that you guys are doing that. And thanks as well for mentioning the education. That's a huge component, right? Simply having those workshops.
What's the average number of satellites what's the most or ideal, or are there people that have more than one satellite to the main location, I guess?
So this is brand new, right? This is like mostly me talking about it. And I'm not a compost expert. It's just that's clear from the conversation today that I'm not an expert in this. It's that we have money for it and we want to help fund it, and we've been involved with some of them. I would think to keep the costs reasonable. I don't know, this is me making numbers up, but if you could get 4 of these or something, to me, that seems like a great way just to, let's say that it's 1 or 2 schools, there's a community location that makes sense, a community center, a senior center, whatever, and then the transfer station. That seems like a great place to start, and also a cost that's probably very manageable.
Can I also add a suggestion?
Sure.
Because we're thinking about this ourselves, is how we can partner with large employers. So for example, we've got Cigna within Bloomfield, and we're looking to see how we can partner with them for not just, possibly composting if they've got their own, on-site cafeteria and stuff, but also other sorts of recyclables. Now, these private corporations are going to be closed, they're going to be open just to their own, which is fine because, you know, if it's serving at least that population, but it's in partnership and it's acting as a satellite, then that's worth considering. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, so I mean, the challenge with all of this is that, I mean, everybody benefits from, if we're talking about a public benefit, we all benefit from everybody or anybody participating in this, whether it's public or private. I mean, that's the same question for many of the projects that we support, but particularly the ones that have greenhouse gas outcomes is not, whatever, like complications. So we could probably do something, let's say that if it were set up on Cigna's campus and it were, you know, usable only by Cigna's employees, or even if it were made, you know, that they said, sure, other people could come, but nobody else is ever going to come because there's not signage, there's not robust sort of marketing to let people know that they can do that. That wouldn't work for us. But if they wanted to host a location and it really were a sensible spot in the community and they were sort of committed to managing it, I mean, one thing that we would hope to in that case is that Cigna, they could probably pick up a lot of the cost of doing it as well. And it's something that they should look at doing on their own too. So there are models in which we can do things that are sort of like a public-private partnership, as long as public accessibility is sort of like maintained and is at the forefront.
Right, and I did realize if it's a private corporation closed to the general public, it wouldn't qualify for sustainable CT. But I think I'm just throwing ideas out there about, you know, sort of comprehensive programs, especially as we're talking about satellite and partnerships. And then the other thing I wanted to share is our retirement community, our largest retirement community, Seabury, which is also in Bloomfield, is actually supposedly one of the most sustainable communities in the country. And they just purchased it's not a biodigester, but it's the same as what Stanford has. And it's because of Stanford's program that they learned about this. And they must have gotten one that's twice the size of Stanford's because it can process 300 pounds of food waste a day, sorry, that gets reduced to 30 pounds. So that's really exciting. But what's really cool also is that they'd be really willing to talk about their experience, like how they chose that, how they funded it, whether or not the size works for them. So I think that having these case studies is really useful for all of us, because then we can talk to the people who've done these things. But I just wanted to add them to the list of case studies, I think is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I mean, I don't know of many groups in Connecticut that have those in-vessel units. So one, it's great to know that they were sort of inspired by Stanford and then did it because of that, but also that they're there and willing to talk about it. I mean, one thing that we could do out of this, if there's interest from folks, I'd be happy to connect with the different, you know, folks who have implemented these different types of programs in towns and to set up a separate, you know, Zoom session, webinar, whatever, where they could actually talk about their experience with getting this going, utilization, the costs, you know, what they learned, because we're tangentially involved with these things, right? We're helping to fund them. We're learning about them as well, but I'm not out there implementing the program. So if there's an interest in that, I'd be happy to reach out to, you know, someone that could speak to each of these models and to set up a separate session to actually have them come and talk about it. Because I think that's what's going to make it most sort of accessible and replicable for you guys, is knowing exactly what they did. Because I mean, to your point before, Felicia, I mean, sure, different towns, there's different solutions that are right for different towns, you know, based on your size, your the geographic makeup, if it's really rural, really urban, suburban, whatever, right? I mean, there's going to be different things, but in each case, these are pretty replicable solutions. They're not going to change enormously from town to town, because the idea, the program, it's the same. It's just choosing the right one that works for your town. And you guys who know your town, then, you know, sort of tweaking these existing programs to make sure that they're most relevant and most applicable for your communities. But so I'll do that. I saw some heads nodding and thumbs up. So I'll reach out to people and set up another one of these coming up. Also, I know we're like 16 minutes past time. So anybody that has to jump off. I'm free. I'm happy to stay as long as people still have questions or want to talk. One other thing that I guess I'll mention on this is that thinking of like the public-private partnership, restaurants, right? Like restaurants are a huge issue for this. They're a huge producer of waste. They've been hit really hard over the past year. So they don't have, I mean, it's not going to be an attractive or exciting prospect to go out to restaurants and say, hey, do you want to pay to have a hauler come and take away your food waste? And they're going to say, yeah, you know, throw another bill on me right now, of course. So we've been looking at things where if Now, this applies more so to suburban and urban areas where, you know, it's densely populated. But if there are, I mean, even in smaller towns where there's a main street or something like that, we could work on something where if many or all of the businesses or restaurants in a particular block, area, main street, whatever, if they wanted to participate in one of this, they could either be, you know, the one location in a town or the, you know, one of the satellite locations. So let's say that there's Food Scraps and there's a transfer station location. If then the restaurants, you know, if they're tightly packed enough that they could have really one bin that works for all of them, or, you know, multiple bins, but that could be shared between them, setting up one of those, that could be funded through us. So we couldn't do it if it's just one restaurant, because then it's too clearly like a benefit to a private business. But if it's sort of something that's coming from community and that represents all of the businesses or restaurants in a town or location, that one does work for us. Another model like that is multifamily housing. So if you have apartment complexes, condo associations, and you know, where a large number, 100 residents, 50, 20, whatever, however many it is that live there, if they wanted to have one of this set up there, as long as the, you know, the property management company or whatever could commit to managing these, to getting the word out to the residents that, you know, that this exists, here's how you participate, then that's another one that could work, and that we think has the potential to be really impactful, because you have folks there, they're already, you know, walking out to the trash and the recycling area. So then you add these compost bins, and it's just simply having Food Scraps on top of that. And that's like a, you know, again, it's a hybrid of the curbside program, where instead of doing it at 100 different houses, you do it at one site, but there's 100 people who live there. So those are some other models that would work on our end that are like a little bit more moving towards the gray area, but because this is an important issue, we have some flexibility on. So that's a bunch of stuff. My homework for next time, I'll start reaching out to people and setting up a Zoom with folks who know more about the actual implementation and the progress of this than I do. And then I'll just shoot out an email to you guys. I'll also send the recording out to everybody in case you want to share this with anybody else, or if there's notes that you want to look at. I'll send my slides as well. And we'll post the recording onto our website too. So if you want to share this with other people, that'll be on like the webinar section of our website, and they'll be able to come and watch through it too. So other than that, and if there are no other questions, thanks for joining. And I'll see you guys soon, hopefully on the next meeting, but also I hope that some of you will be reaching out soon with Food Scraps programs that you need money for. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.